Light crowd this morning, which is fine. We're composers, you know. I know that Sphinx, among the alum, and I think we're a lot of performers, and some sort of maybe branching into composition here and there, but also we have some composers here as well. Maybe we could take. I was thinking, can we take a poll, like? Who here is actually actively pursuing a career in composition currently? Great. We're already doing it, right? How about those who have sort of sparked an interest in composition and you're sort of trying to figure out maybe if this is a direction that you might want to go in? Beautiful.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Just felt that it was better, it would ground me, I'm not speaking to anybody else. It would ground me. And I would like to see now how I can actually transition that grounding into really learning my theory, because I'm feeling that is what I need. I tend to be either very grounded or very, and but I want to transition that grounding out in it.
Okay.
Into really having a strong theory.
Great.
And that will make me feel good, and then the rest is.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. Thank you. And I think we'll probably, we'll get around to talking about all of these kinds of things, all the ways in which one can, investigate that drive and that interest. We'll start by introductions. My name's Jessie Montgomery.
I'm Stephen Swartz.
Yeah.
And my name is Etienne Charles.
Yeah. And I think,
Stephen
just
and
give
then
a,
Etienne.
Exactly.
Maybe
My name
give
is
a-
his name in French.
if you could give a 2-minute sort of description of what you do, what's your life like as a composer? How did you come to compose? Just tell us about yourself.
Me?
Who are you?
My name is Etienne Charles. I was born in Trinidad a long time ago, and yeah, plenty 6 years old. And I'm associate professor of jazz trumpet at Michigan State University, and in that I also teach jazz composition and arranging as a class and as applied lessons. I moved to the U.S. in 2002 to attend Florida State University, and funny enough, my African-American literature teacher is sitting right here. I was completely surprised when I walked in and she was sitting there. And then from there, I moved to New York, and I went to the Juilliard School to do my master's. And then after a year of freelancing in the city, I moved to East Lansing, Michigan, where I still live. And I got interested in composition, I don't know, when I was very small. But I didn't know, because where I'm from, music is everywhere, and improvisation is everywhere, and creating your own thing is everywhere. And so my foray into composition actually happened in school, in primary school, because we had creative writing class. And for most people who couldn't draw, like I can't draw, I have a horrible eye. For most people who couldn't draw, your expression was with words. And so every day we had to write about something. Every single day we had to write maybe 50 to 100 words. And so that got me to let go of any inhibitions about being free with expression. So many, many years later, I became a composer, and it didn't feel like anything new, because I was always writing words, writing. And, it's very important as a composer to be able to write about what you do, because if you can write about it, then you can fundraise it, because you can explain to someone who might not understand. You give them a better idea of what's going on. So, yeah.
Thank you, Etienne. Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that aspect of being a composer, the need to self-fundraise. Yeah, so we'll get to that. And Stephen Swartz, if you could just give us a little introduction.
Yeah, sure. I'm trained as a composer, even though my professional life is in the music, what I call the facetiously named classical music industry, although, it has its own clout. I was a high school guitar slinging singer, songwriter, coffee house kind of guy, and from there I, in college, took up a more formal interest in composition, and meanwhile, keeping a hand in kind of like indie rock and all the rest, and but got my doctorate in composition with Morton Feldman, the late great minimalist composer, and I moved to New York, where I didn't have any kind of prospects of any kind. It was basically like jumping out of the airplane without a parachute, and I ended up doing journalism, the record industry, broadcasting at WNYC, not on the air, but support, music publishing, and somehow in there I started kind of parlayed my interest in writing into an interest in being an advocate for artists and publicity. So that's how I became a publicist. But meanwhile, have performed and composed and all the rest. It's a pretty winding path, but it exposed me to many, many different parts of the industry, of the field, and everything that you learn is going to come in handy someday. I think you can say that.
Thank you. And so my name's Jessie Montgomery, and I am a Sphinx alum, violinist, and composer. And I came to composition directly, maybe similarly as to Etienne, which is that it really came directly out of my playing. I was very fortunate enough to have a teacher. My regular Suzuki violin teacher was also teaching improvisation. She was developing this program called the Creative Ability Development, actually, and she has continued it to this day. We were her guinea pigs, and she was forming this method of teaching, using the similar language as the Suzuki method to teach young kids. I was about 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8, between the ages of 5 and 12, how to improvise. And so there's a direct line between improvisation, and then I joined my composition class at my local music school at 11 and 12, around 11, junior high school, and started composing. And it's sort of, it stuck, and it was a very it came very naturally out of this, my improvisation and this, this natural sort of line between playing and writing and just getting your ideas down. So now I'm both a regular performer and composer. I've been commissioned by Sphinx a few times and was a composer in residence with the Sphinx Virtuosi. And have just been writing for orchestras and chamber music and the like. Probably in the past about 6 or 7 years, things have picked up speed, and so I can officially call myself like a professional composer, I think. Yeah, and so that's fine. Yeah. So good. So so I wanted to talk about this idea of really briefly, because there are a lot of ways to be creative in music, right? And I think that this idea of collaboration and having an ensemble, I wanted to talk about, maybe Etienne can talk to this a little bit, about what's the importance of having an ensemble that you work with regularly, or friends or people that you can sort of call on regularly to help you work through your music, through your ideas. And maybe we could just, give us a little.
Okay, yeah, that's a great point, because that's what I do. So I didn't really talk about what I do musically. I'm a trumpet player, and a percussionist by trade, as we'll say. And I have a group. I have a sextet. It's called Creole Soul, and we've been playing together now for about 10 years, just about. And before that, I was in a small, at Florida State, I was in combos. We were always in these little small groups. So knowing the musicians that you write for me is essential to being a good composer, because a good composer brings out the best in the musicians that it writes for. So you get to know a musician's playing not by listening to one recording of them. You get to know a musician's playing by listening to them play over and over again. You get to know musicians playing by eating food with them and knowing what type of movies they like and traveling with them. And so for my band, sometimes I don't even put the names of the instruments. I just put the names of the musicians on the parts, simply because it's something that I've written for them. And it makes for a more cohesive product. In a sense, because one, the musicians know what they can add, and in jazz there's a lot of improvisation involved as well, and there's a lot of embellishment to what actually is written, and so for me it makes me feel very free as a composer, knowing that I've built up a relationship, a strong, almost like brotherly relationship with 5 or 6 other musicians that I can call on at any time, and know that when I put new music in front of them, we're gonna have fun trying to, it's almost like we're building a house, and one person's really good at mixing cement and laying bricks, and one person's really good at the electronics, and one person's really good at the plumbing and the piping, and one person's really good at decorating and figuring out what color furniture, so that's what I think about when I write for my band.
I should mention that's no less important thing in the more classically oriented tradition, where you're not necessarily a composer-performer, but you're writing for musicians. The composer Terry Riley, who's best known for his piece In C, has now written, I think, 28 string quartets for Kronos Quartet, who are clients of mine in my company, DOTDOTDOTMUSIC. And that kind of, over decades, collaboration where you really get to know the players allows you as a composer to write things for them that resonate.
Yeah, and also I think that there's certainly the way that the performers interpret your music and the kind of dialogue that you can establish with them it really informs your style. I mean, I feel I was talking a bit about how improvisation has informed or changed, influenced my composing, and it's really like that dialogue, that back and forth. Especially, I'm thinking about my experience working with public quartet, in which I was a member, but the sort of the language that was developing around the improvisation, and then notating it, talking about it, like hugely influenced my style. So, and that learning from that kind of exchange, it's like you sort of, some of it, it's, you can start to sort of feel like it's beyond you after a certain point. There's this language that's developing that's something other than you're not just this composer in your own world. You're really creating something with other people, and
it's interpersonal.
It's interpersonal. That's right. Great, thank you. And I think maybe we can talk a little bit about, so we have a lot to get through today, actually. There's a lot of things that we can talk about as composers, what to do, how to get your music out there. So I think maybe we'll talk a little bit about this idea of, so when you have a piece of music that you want to share with the world, or an idea that you want to develop, then we're looking at, or collaborating with ensembles. We're looking at commissioning, and so if you're a performer, you want to be able to have the right, figure out a project and seek funding for commissions. And there are, I think there are drawbacks and benefits to both seeking funding at first versus just write the piece and get it out there. So I don't know, maybe we can talk just briefly about, I wanted to talk maybe about this project that you did that I thought was really amazing, the CMA Jazz grant. Yeah, well, so this was a sort of involved, rather layered project, but it was like you had an idea, you went for it, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
So the project that she's mentioning is a project that was a commission from Chamber Music America, and Margaret is actually here. It was actually it was a crazy idea I had, right? So I'm originally from Trinidad, which spent 299 years as a Spanish colony, and then became a British colony in 1797. And so I took an interest in colonialism. I'm a big fan of history. I've never really studied it. Like, the last history class I took was as a sophomore in college. But when I got out of college, I started reading a lot about history, like what they don't teach you in school. And so I got really interested in the effects of colonialism in modern times. And so it's funny enough, I was at a conference just like this. It's a conference in New York called APAP, which is it's like a meat market. It's really crazy if you haven't been. But I was meeting, what people do is they get together and they meet for breakfast. So I knew someone at the San Jose Jazz Festival. I knew the director of the festival. Funny enough, he owned a restaurant that was my favorite restaurant in San Jose. That's how I knew him. And I told him, I was thinking, because San Jose, California was a Spanish colony, and San Jose in Costa Rica was a Spanish colony. And I was like, well, San Jose in Trinidad was the capital. So I wonder if there's a way to tie the three of them together and figure out what was similar and what was different about their experiences with these Spanish conquistadors. And so I sat down and I kind of, that was the idea. Okay, and what could I do? And it was January, I think. It was middle of January that I started like putting the idea together. And somebody had told me about Chamber Music America. And they said that they fund new jazz works specifically for groups, groups that are, that have been a group for a while and whatnot. I was like, well, I've done a bunch of recordings with my band. Let me do up this application. So I did the application, and we got the grant, thank God. And
Very
then, I was like, okay, well, let me start doing this research. So then what we did, I started at home in Trinidad. So I had done a bunch of reading. I read a book called Capitalism and Slavery by Dr. Eric Williams, which is a great book if you haven't read it. And it proves that slavery was abolished in the British West Indies, not for humanitarian reasons, but specifically for capitalist reasons. And then I read a book called The Open Veins of Latin America by a guy named Eduardo Galeano, who gives you a breakdown of the victimization of the indigenous people in South America. And then I went to Trinidad, and a photographer by the name of Maria Nunes, who's a very dear friend of mine now, she took me up into San Jose and introduced me to a bunch of musicians there. And they were descendants of the indigenous people, and they were descendants of the African immigrants to Trinidad. And that became the focus point, was the indigenous peoples and the African descendants. So that was Christmas time in Trinidad, because we have a special music that happens. It's very Spanish oriented. And then I called Maria and I said, look, I'm going to Costa Rica in 2 days to go and live with the indigenous people and go and live with the descendants of the African immigrants. Do you want to come? And she was like, well, yeah, I'm not doing anything. It's, Boxing Day in Trinidad. And so we went to Costa Rica. And but luckily what that did was that I took a photographer and a videographer who was also going to record audio for me. And so I lived with the Baruca people in Costa Rica, who are, they're one of the last 8 indigenous tribes in Costa Rica. And they still make their own textiles, they grow their own food, they live exactly like they did 200 years ago, just that they have cell phones. But it's strange because they have an enclosed cellular network that no one can call into or call out from. They can only speak to each other on their network. It's really crazy. And they do this festival where they make these wooden masks and they decorate them and paint them, and they butt heads with this bull, a fake bull. And what that does, their dance is basically their reenactment of the war that happened, the 34-year-long war that they fought with the Spanish conquistadors. And so from that, then we went south to Cahuita, which was a town, it's a black town in Costa Rica. Costa Rica was segregated until 1949, and basically Africans came to Costa. They never had African slaves in Costa Rica. So the Africans that came to Costa Rica came in the late 19th century, around 1872. and they came from the people who dug the Panama Canal. They came up to Costa Rica to work building a railroad, and then they stayed. And so they were English-speaking West Indians from the Caribbean, just like me. And so that created a strong connection. I was like, wait a minute, I'm in Costa Rica speaking English with these people, eating the food that I grew up with in Trinidad, and playing calypso with them. And so it blew my mind. And then from there, we went to California. And that's like, Maria's coming to California with me. We went to California, met with the Muwekma people of California, which are the indigenous people of the San Francisco Bay Area. This is a large indigenous tribe. And you might not know who they are, but you've seen their work because they built every single mission in the Bay Area. So Mission San Francisco, Mission San Jose, all of those missions, which unfortunately were basically like concentration camps for indigenous people. So I got to meet with them. I met with the chairperson. Her name is Rosemary Canberra. She was a very warm, loving person. They gave me this 2-hour PowerPoint presentation on their whole history. And I sat with them and I learned about the history, and she told me, write some music to tell our story. And then I met with Dr. Harry Edwards. If you don't know who he is, you should definitely go Google him. He is the reason he wrote a book called, I can't remember, it's something about the black athlete. I can't remember the name right now. But he was the spearhead behind a movement in San Jose, California that caught, anybody ever see the picture of Tommy Smith and John Carlos with their fists in the air with black gloves on? Anybody ever see that picture? 1968 Olympics, Mexico City. So that protest was one of the culminations of something that started at San Jose State University in the early 60s. And it was when they first started having black students, and they were athletes, and they came to the school to get degrees and compete, but they weren't allowed to take certain classes. They weren't able to live in certain dorms. They weren't allowed to be parts of certain extracurricular activities. And so the protest started very small, and it built up into this monster called the Olympic Project for Human Rights, which would, if you look at Tommy Smith and John, they have these pins on their shirts. And so then, after doing all that, I got video footage of everything and audio recordings of everything. I went back. I went to a place called Hot Springs, Virginia, which is in the middle of Washington National Forest. It's a beautiful place if you haven't been. And there's a music place there called Garth Newell Music Center. They have a string quartet. They have a piano quartet in residence, and they bring composers in. Okay. And the director is a friend of mine, a fellow Florida State alum. And I stayed there for a week and locked myself in his house and wrote the music. I had all this video footage. I had like a little studio set up with my laptop with all the little videos, and then I wrote the music. And so it was a pretty crazy idea, but what it was all of these different parts of history that I was able to see in real time by meeting with people and getting the oral tradition. Because you could get a lot from a book, but the one thing that a book doesn't give you the immediate reaction of somebody's emotion to what happened. And so that was the blessing of doing the research that way. So person-to-person interaction, and then I was able to write the music. That was the sweet.
That's beautiful. I mean, I think that's a testament to, how far music can take you. All of the different, it's a tool for discovery, and I think it's incredible that you were able to have that journey through that piece. And actually, you should listen to the piece. It's rather special. So it's all of that stuff in musical form. Yeah.
And we should talk also. I mean, CMA is, if you're a chamber musician, of course you should join it. It's a wonderful membership organization. If you're a composer, you should consider becoming a member of New Music USA, which incorporates Meet the Composer, that organization, which has done so much to bring composers in contact with audiences and create residency opportunities. The American Composers Forum out of the Twin Cities is another excellent membership organization. And all of these organizations have resources, information about how to fund your vision. Grants, types of models for commissioning, and nowadays, of course, there's also crowdfunding, which is, an approach that's proven very successful, in certain cases, but information, knowledge is power, and these organizations are great repositories of that knowledge. So reach out, and if you want to, make your way,
Yeah.
join forces.
And generally speaking, there's usually somebody on staff at any one of these organizations it's like their job, basically, to help field questions, any kind of questions you might have about the application process. And we're, they're all musicians and, artist friendly, so they're usually really nice and helpful people.
Yep.
So you should always feel, feel confident about reaching out whenever you need to. Great. And let's see. I think maybe we can talk, so like this is a very elaborate project, and, sometimes you just have a piece of music that you want to get out there, right? You have this piece, this little, let's say it's a 7-minute string quartet or I don't know, wind quintet, who knows? 7 or 8 minute piece that you want to share with the world. Maybe we could talk a little bit about certain platforms that are available. There's the obvious, maybe not obvious to everyone, but SoundCloud, people know about SoundCloud. And maybe, Stephen, you can talk a little bit about.
Yeah. Who here has tracks on SoundCloud? Raise your hand. Who here has tracks or merchandise or recordings that they're selling on Bandcamp? Great platforms. The streaming services, which are becoming much more important than ever in terms of the way people consume music. Those types of things like Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, Pandora, what have you, you get your music on them through your digital distributor. If you have a recording project, you have a label, the label will have deals in place with those platforms, and they do that. But SoundCloud is something which is reserved for the creators of the music to, and there you can put things up there for free, or you can subscribe and get other benefits like access to everything that's on there. But it's become the new standard for how to share your music. There's a wonderful show called New Sounds on WNYC, which you can hear via streaming and also the radio itself, that quaint thing. And the host, John Schaefer, has been at it for decades, and he's one of the most influential people in the world of new music, broadly defined. And I asked him once, how do you discover new stuff? And he said, SoundCloud. You're just kind of poking around on it. And that was really cool. So you definitely want to be there. And Bandcamp is another great platform. You can decide how much, if anything, you want to sell your tracks for. You can sell merchandise like, T-shirts or, cassettes, actual CDs, and so on. And they have very good terms. They pay the artist fairly, and they are also have taken a strong position in social justice. Last Friday, they actually donated 100% of their proceeds to the ACLU. And so I think Bandcamp is a great platform for getting your music out to people.
Yeah. And also I'm just going to make a plug for my colleagues in the room, Public Quartet. They actually have a competition that they run every year called Public Access, I think, which was mentioned in the showcase last night. And that's, I think, an application that is free of charge to apply. Yes. And I think when it comes to, like, if you're just starting out, I like the idea that, when you're sending out your music for people, hopefully to read or play or perform, when you're just getting out there, be wary of application fees. I don't know. I have a personal issue with application fees, although maybe there's something to it that I don't understand. But if when you're really just trying to get going, don't get sucked into that if you can avoid it, or sometimes people can waive those kinds of application fees. I feel like, you know, if you're not, you know, it's you're kind of sharing your music at that point. Yeah. So I think maybe.
But could I just add one thing? Sorry.
Please.
The one thing that we didn't say that I will say, because I'm that person, I'll say don't stream your music on Spotify. Don't put your music on Tidal. Just don't do it. You know, simply because if 30 years ago people used to pay 25 cents to listen to a song once on a jukebox, why is it that now musicians are getting paid 0.001 cents per play online? Like, music is the only thing that has depreciated in value over the past 30 years. 30 years ago, how much was a carton of milk? How much is a carton of milk now? How much was a car 30 years ago? How much is a car now? But for some reason, music has basically become free. Okay? And if we give it away, it's free. If we hold on to it, it's ours until they pay for it. So if you don't put it on there, now I use SoundCloud simply because it's something that I can control. I don't use Bandcamp yet. But I'm a big advocate for protecting your music because it's a product. It's your creative work. It's the same way a painting is in a museum, and the only reason you can see it is because you paid $10 to go into the museum. And I think we as artists and composers and musicians need to, you know, we kind of need to make a pact. We kind of need to make an agreement with each other that, look, if we want to have have an industry 30 years from now, we need to act very seriously right now. And so I would just say, like, no more streaming, just because people will, if you give some people something for free, they expect it for free over and over again. That's human nature. And so if you make sure they know that they have to pay for it, they pay for it. That's also human nature. So yeah, but yeah, just stay away from the streaming thing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the reality is that people are consuming music through streaming. You know, like, you can choose which services, or, you know, you could direct your label not to put your music out at one or another, but it's they're the ones with the agreement. So if you have your own label, you can do that. But you know, change has got to come in terms of the way artists, musicians are compensated.
Yeah, because the thing with the labels are record labels get a cut of advertising from these apps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the record label makes more off of these apps using your music for free than you do.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself is unfair.
Yeah,
now,
there's
if
a
they
much
wanted to,
bigger gap
if they
between the
wanted to
record
give,
company and
if
the
they
artist
wanted to
now
give,
than ever.
if
Yeah.
if Spotify wanted to give me the composer a cut out of their however many millions of dollars they get in advertising a month, fine. But they're not doing that with composers. They're doing that with record labels.
Mm-hmm.
And the record labels are not the ones making the music. We the ones making the music. They the ones trying to sell it.
Right.
See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit, I mean, I own my own label. And that's a bit
Right.
the reason that I do that.
And maybe can
And
you
so-
talk a little bit about what you did to establish your own label, and sort of like,
You know, I'm from a very simple family, a very simple place. And, you know, when I was very small, I was told, don't complain about anything, just do something, figure out what needs to get done. And so I was at Florida State, and my teacher was a gentleman by the name of Marcus Roberts. And he was a great composer, classical and jazz. And he gave me a project. He said, I want you to write a suite of music. I said, okay, I'll write a suite of music. And then he said, okay, well, this is pretty all right. We should record it. I was like, okay, how do we record it? He's like, well, we're going to go into the studio. You got to find some musicians, pay them, etc. And so I found some money, you know, asked for some favors for some friends, and we did a recording. And then I was like, so what do I do next? He's like, okay, well, next step is we're going to edit it and mix it. So I sat down with his engineer, and we figured out exactly what we wanted to do for edits and mixes. Okay, cool. And so now I had this mixed album. He's like, well, next thing you got to do is you have to master it. So I went to New York. I got a number from Mark Wilder, at Sony, and we mastered the album. He's like, next thing you need artwork. I was like, okay, so you get artwork. Got some photos taken and got the artwork done. And then he was like, okay, now you need to print them. I was like, okay, so we print them. So we printed 1,000 copies of the album. And I was like, well, now what? He's like, well, now you sell them. I was like, okay, cool. So I started selling them, called my parents, called their friends. They called, and we sold off 1,000 CDs. And I was like, well, what's next? Like, well, you print another 1,000. I was like, okay, cool. And at that point, I didn't know that I was an independent record label. I was just doing what I was told. Right. And so that's all a record label is. A record label is that entity that manufactures the music and puts it out there through marketing and through promotion and whatnot. And yeah, my last year we celebrated our 10th anniversary, and we've released 6 albums to date. We've recorded, we have 2 more to release this year. We've done the jazz charts, and we've sold, I think we've sold, I don't know, just a little bit more than 10,000 albums over the past 10 years. And that's a big deal when you own the record. And so I would be a big advocate of doing it yourself. Find the funding if you can. There's lots of funds available. You could crowdfund. If you have 5,000 friends on Facebook, how many of y'all use Facebook? Wow. Okay. So if you have 5,000 friends on Facebook and each of them give you $4, right? That's a good budget for an album right there, right? And then you sell those albums you could sell it for between $8 and $10, and you're making profit. But at the end of the day, it's just about getting the music out there without losing money, and you're not giving it away for free. So that's how I started my label.
Great, and I think maybe there's that. I'm just going to add to that the issue of publishing. So that's what you really like when you're selling your own music. You want to be able to own the publishing of your music, and that's handled through ASCAP and BMI and these royalty companies. These are the major organizations here, and then there's the equivalent over in Europe. It allows you to set up basically you establish yourself within the organization, you become a member, and then you can assign yourself the official royalty rights for being both the creator and the publisher of your works, and that's when it's 50% publisher, 50% creator, and then you receive all of the full 100% royalties for that. And that's you do that online. You sit there, it takes an afternoon to register, 2 or 3, not an afternoon, it takes 20 minutes, 25 minutes to register these pieces, and then as the pieces get circulated, then you get everything. And that's what we want to do, if you can.
Yeah, maybe I should mention a little bit about some of the other income streams as a composer. ASCAP and BMI handle what are called small rights, like if your piece is played somewhere as a performance in a bona fide venue, not a school, but in a concert hall. Also, they collect from performances, as they're known. If your music is broadcast or played in restaurants or places like that, there are mechanical rights for selling recordings. You get a little, those are arranged through the Harry Fox agency. Your label sets that up. There are rights to stage a performance of a theatrical work. Those are called grand rights. And those are negotiated with splits to the other creators, the librettist and so on. Again, these composer organizations can help you break down, what those rights are and who gets which kind of money. There's also licensing, and this is big. If your music gets used in a TV show, a commercial, or a film, there are separate royalties payable for that, which need to be negotiated. And these days, where income from selling recordings tends to be pretty modest, if it's there at all. I had a band, and we put out a couple of records, and I got a note from our British label that they were going to aggregate our royalties until they reached £5 sterling before they would send us anything. So I think my grandchildren will get, because I was getting checks for 37 cents and stuff like that. Anyway, so, but if you can get your music licensed, you know, to use in other media, then those fees can be very lucrative, and that has sustained a lot of artists and acts. So again, you know, these membership organizations will help you make sense of all these different income streams. And then finally, should we talk about publisher publishing?
Sure, publisher publishing, yes. Okay,
Please.
we have I just wanted to let you guys know we're about
Couple minutes,
8 minutes.
Okay.
I'll just add one more thing, couple things about the publishing. That do a little bit of homework before you decide who to join. Simply because different collection agencies have different mandates. ASCAP is an association that's not for profit. BMI is a business, so they're a little more, quote unquote, shark-like about collecting fees. ASCAP, if you're in the singer-songwriter, pop, rock and roll world, you do a lot better in ASCAP than if you're a jazz or classical composer. BMI is pretty they're pretty run-of-the-mill, even across genres. I just switched from ASCAP to CSAC, and the cool thing about CSAC is they pay you per performance. So if your music, it's the only collection agency where you send a report for each concert that you do, where it is, how many people, like the capacity of the hall, the ticket price, and they go to the different venues and they collect for you. And if you play your original music, or if you're a composer and you have a group that's performing there, so you get paid per performance. And they also give you bonuses based on if you get radio play. It's like if you get heavy rotation or you go between top 10 in the radio chart, they give you a bonus as well. And on the whole licensing thing, this is where reading is very important. 2 words that you should always remember are worldwide and in perpetuity.
Yes.
And if you see either one of those things, you don't sign. You call your lawyer, okay? You call your lawyer and you figure out a way to negotiate so that it's not worldwide and it's not in perpetuity. Because what that does is it takes away a lot of money from you, okay? And just on that same vein, with respect to licensing your music for big licenses, so like small licenses, performances and radio play and whatnot, but big licenses like TV shows, this is where record labels get really happy, because if you're on a record label and they license your composition or your song, like they say they license Jessie's piece or something, it's broken down into publishing and recording. So if you own 100% of the publishing, you get 1 check. And then whoever owns 100% of the master or the recording, they get another check. And so it could be your album, but it's on a label, but the label's gonna make more off of it than you. So be careful. Make sure you read.
Publisher I used to work for had a phrase in their contracts, in any and all present or future media throughout the universe in perpetuity.
Yep, that's the currency.
Sorry. I just we can go on about a lot of this, and actually, in fact, Stephen put up on the platform, the online landing page. There's this a sheet that he's put together that has all of wonderful information about self-promotion. There's the sheet. And you can go online and check about ways in which to feature yourself, how to build a proper website, how to promote yourself, how to sort of set up your brand, and those things. And actually, there's another brand talk later with Allison Luggins Hull later this afternoon, talking about branding and how to get yourself out there. We want to open it up, I think, now to any questions. Yes, sir. Oh, and there's a microphone up here. Sure. It's over here.
Yeah, I'm doing a licensing deal right now with Vice.
Right.
Vice News.
Uh-huh.
And they were like, it's like first of all, I was like, you talking about
I know most of this information, if not all of it, I'll need to know, but I've always been interested in composing for film. And if that, whatever you have that's a little bit different, thank you.
Sure. You know what?
Well, composing for film is a market in itself and a skill set in itself. I'd say find a fledgling filmmaker and collaborate.
Yeah.
That's how you get your credential. A film student, go to the local school, say, I will write a score for you, in exchange for the experience and a few bucks if you make any money.
And what you what you want to do is, it's called developing a reel. So it's your a catalog of, it can be 4 or 5 small short films that you have sought out in this way, and you create a reel. And so that's something that you would share with whomever you're wanting to share it with, and they can sort of see the variety of how your music works with film. Yeah. Yes.
Hello, my name's Christian. I have 2 questions. The first one is there a criteria or certain standards that you have to meet to join those companies like BMI so that I can register myself in my compositions? It's
No.
just open?
Just do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my second question is, where should you draw the line in demanding that you're written into the credits for something? Because clearly if you're the composer, you want to have all the credits, but like if you're like a singer on something, a featured singer, it's not necessarily as important, but certain people will want that, versus if you're like a producer or something like that. Because from what I understand, you're supposed to be in the credits if you write any of the music or any of the lyrics, but there might be some gray area in between there.
I don't know. It's a personal preference to me. I don't know to name everyone. I mean, I feel like if it fits on the back of the record, I'll put as many people's names on there. But it doesn't, just to acknowledge their contribution. It's not, and that also doesn't necessarily mean. It depends on, well, there's lots of different ways. When you put out an album, sometimes the performers will receive royalties from that album, and a lot of the time they won't actually. It's
called work for hire.
Work for
Yeah,
hire,
so
yeah.
work for hire basically means that you're giving up anything that you might creatively contribute to a project for a particular fee of that day normally. But I would say credits are very important, and if you perform on something, make sure they have your name, make sure it's spelled right, and you might know now, but 20 years down the road, you want people to know that that was you. And if you look at the last 30 years of music, specifically in America, 30 years from now, we're not going to know anything except for the name of whoever the artist was. Simply because they don't put it on, they don't put it in the credits. And on top of, how many of y'all are subscribed to Sound Exchange? Anybody? Ooh, okay, good. So Sound Exchange is an online database. It's actually an online collection agency. And what they do is they collect specifically for all digital media of airplay. This is long before Spotify and streams, right? And Sound Exchange, you register, you give them your name, and you tell them what you do, okay? You give them your name, you tell them what you do. And it takes 6 months. And in those first 6 months, they go online and they gather every single recording that you've either played on, written for. So if there's an arranger, sang at, once your name is in the credits, okay, and whatever your name is in the credit for, they collect based on that for you, and they drop it into an account. My first deposit was for $9,000.
Nice.
And I haven't been on that many records, okay? And I know of people who go, I know of a drummer, the drummer from many top sessions. His first deposit was for $70,000.
Wow.
all because his name was on the album. So go to if you've recorded albums and your name's on the credits, go sign up a sound exchange. They pay you quarterly. They pay you at once every 3 months, and go on there and make sure make sure your name's on the album.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Hi. Thing is too.
Yeah, it's a little higher. Right?
Tilted down.
You can use this.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Hi. My name is Nye Stevenson. It's just something I would like for you guys to repeat because I heard you said that ASCAP was good for singer-song pop writers. Is there some like other website or database that's more jazz and classical friendly?
I would say, I mean, as the camera's on and whatnot. So, but I would. BMI is run of the mill. They're great. Being non-American, I had to go through all kinds of rings to be able to join a collection agency. And actually, at the time, I was not eligible to join BMI. So I joined ASCAP, and but yeah, BMI is great for classical. But I mean, they're all great. But I'm just from what I've seen. And CSAC, you actually have to. You asked the question about what you have to do. CSAC, you actually have to apply. You have to send them your music, and they listen to it, and then they decide if they're gonna bring you into the fold. But yeah, I would check out BMI if it's a jazz classical thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine?
Hi, my name is Christine, and I showed up a little late, so if this is redundant, I'd be happy to talk after. But I was wondering, I recently ventured into arranging, and I have no clue about the legalities of that. So yeah. So
We could do 50 minutes on that.
yeah. Any maybe big issues or something that stand out would be appreciated.
Take the floor. I'm also similarly underversed and needing,
Yes, I mean,
figure that out too.
any arrangement which you're making just for your own use, if it's going to be performed publicly and subject to collection of royalties, then you need to license the arrangement with the copyright holder, the publisher. If it's in the public domain, if it's Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, you don't need that. But if it's an existing piece of music, that is under copyright protection, you do need to get permission.
And do y'all know how to find out if something's public domain or not? Huh?
I am SLP. He said.
Huh. It becomes public domain, I think, 74 years. 74 years after the death of the composer.
Right.
Right?
So, yeah.
But some people, when they write a song, they put their child's name on the publisher and as the composer, so that it will be 74 years from the death of their child or grandchild. So, anyway. But yeah, the arranging is tricky. But I do know people who copyright their arrangements and get paid per performance of their arrangement.
It can be done. It's
Yeah, you
not
just have to negotiate it.
restricted. Yeah, exactly.
And one more question.
Yeah, this is just really quick. My name is Candea Shepherd. I'm a fellow Trinidadian and Trinidadian host. I went to Berklee College of Music, so much of this stuff, and I actually work for the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, so it's interesting to be here at the panel. Quickly, can you, I guess, give the new composers a few tools as you're talking about music business, free, if you know of any free resources where they can go, for instance, like these MOOCs that are out there from these different colleges, that they can go and research and start knowing the music business and tell them how important it is for them to be the actual, like they have to know when they walk into the room what they're talking about.
That's a great question.
That is a great question. Well, I mean, personally, I feel like I'm always schooling myself on what I'm supposed to be doing. And right now I'm reading a book that's called Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Music Publishing. And do you know this book?
Like
No.
Kozlowski?
Yes, that
Yeah.
one. Okay,
What
so,
do you know about
and it's
music
really
business?
nuts and bolts.
It's a great one.
And I read it on the
Good guy.
subway whenever I'm on my commute. And that's, you know, you can go to the book, your local bookstore, and go to the music section, and educate yourself.
This business of
yeah.
music, is that the same one? Or
It's
Yeah,
different
it's-
than the
yeah, but
business
it's
of
the same
music,
guy, yeah.
but it's
All
the
you
same
need to know
guy.
about the
Right,
music
okay.
business, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, great place to start.
I would say, for me, I had two really good. I had a bunch of mentors, and like what I'm saying is find mentors, right? Because it's always good when you have somebody who's walked the road and they know what goes on, and then they could give you the inside scoop. That's the reason I own all my music. That's the reason I'm a shark when these people send me these contracts and I can go through them in and out, right? Find mentors and find people who will have your back. Know that you will make mistakes, and that's okay, but know that success is when you don't make the same mistake twice, right?
We should end with that.
That's right. Beautiful. Thanks, Etienne, and thanks, Stephen, and thank you,
Jessie.
everyone. Yes. And we'll be hanging out if you want to ask more questions. Thank you.